Greetings historians, welcome to Lore of the Dragon. Stepping back into the world of Spyro, I decided it might be good to have a small video focusing again on the topic of elements. Especially those elements that we don't see too often. There are many that have simply been left in the past, left as a mystery within the lore of the Legend of Spyro, but which we will cover here in as much detail as we can. Today, I'd like to delve into the elements of shadow and fear together. Why? Because at least to me, they occupy a niche in the world that garner a look at them together. And also, both don't really have a whole lot going on besides surface level observation and speculation. So, a forewarning, the first half of this video is going to be most of everything we know about the elements. And the second half will simply be analyzing what isn't said in the games, and are my own observations. If that doesn't interest you, I've left timestamps to each part in the description or chapters along the timeline in the video. Feel free to click off whenever you prefer. Anyway, let's start looking into these two elements. What exactly the shadow element is seems clear enough from its name alone. It is the ability to become a shadow, or at least something like that. Of course, most would know that a shadow is just the absence of light, though in this it seems to be far more physical. Sometimes even claws come from a theoretical void, allowing for devastating abilities. Such is Shadow's primary ability, Shadow Strike, accompanied by yet another ability, Shadow Fire. Of course, its use can be traced back to one particular character within the Legend of Spyro, specifically during Dawn of the Dragon, Cinder. She got those powers in the same way she got most of her elements, through Malefor and his powers being used to corrupt her. I've seen some cases where people theorize about her being a wind dragon, or some cases where she's a shadow dragon. There's nothing to confirm nor deny either of these, not really, so I would just have fun with speculation. The only one I might say is just, we haven't seen a wind dragon. The only other use I've seen for the element, besides being used for offensive purposes, is that of the Shadow Gates, both in Warfang and in the dam close by. I'll give this bit of trivia to the fandom wiki, that it's mentioned there is a face or motif on the gate that looks like Malefor, which I'm assuming means that his forces put it there. In places that probably were held by Warfang or weren't really controlled by him. So it's just kind of funny to think that Malefor thought it was a good idea to randomly place gates where realistically his opponents have more influence than he does. Fear, by contrast, is an emotion, which seems to be manipulated with this element, accompanied by what sounds like an amplified scream and a red hue to its color. Its abilities are the Siren Scream, its breath attack, and second to it is Phantom Fright, which seems to be more physical as it sends orbs that stun the user's opponents. This probably works in the same way that the Siren Scream does, but I digress. The symbol used to represent it shows, for some versions of Dawn of the Dragon, Cinder's skull, and for others, what seems to be a normal skull by contrast. But the usage of Cinder for fear seems more in line with this universe. Her time as the terror of the skies, I imagine, would have solidified her as the embodiment of fear for her foes, just as she was in A New Beginning for Spyro. Of course, we see Cinder being a user of this element, but also Malefor does as well at the climax of the battle between him, Cinder, and Spyro. And of course, Cinder's ability to use the element is also derived from Malefor's powers. It's, unlike the rest of the elements, is far more based in the sound it makes, and of course in its capacity to stop victims in their tracks. It's the only element that we know of that affects the victim mentally more so than physically. Like that of the Shadow Gates, there are parts of the ruins of Warfang which host tuning forks of sorts, which are tuned using the Siren Scream. Given most of the elements we see in the game can't do anything with the tuning forks, and they're used for progression through the game, it makes me question why these are here like the Shadow Gates beforehand. I mean, they seem more like they're designed in the same way Warfang would design something, not so much how Malefor would. So it seems a bit odd. Maybe there's some speculation that to be had, like maybe there's fear dragons in Warfang, or there's a different sound-based elements that we just haven't seen or heard about. But that's all it is, speculation. I'll leave that to the comment section below. I just wanted to ask that question. Now, if you're me, you might have thought that fear was something thought of for Spyro specifically, but that's not actually the case. There's an interview that was held on a website called Worth Playing, discussing different aspects or inspirations for the game. And it was stated that fear actually is derived from various fantasy books, such as Dragonlance, and an ability within the universe called Dragon Fear. In it, dragons have a similar power which seems to be translated into the world of Spyro. Okay, so, speculation time from me. The elements of Shadow and Fear specifically have massive differences between them and the rest of the elements. They don't come from anything physical in the world. In the case of Shadow and Shadow Fire, of course, one can make a fire that has a black flame or even a flame that one cannot see, but that's not a shadow. A shadow is simply the absence of light. This is something else entirely. Now, obviously, as mentioned earlier, Cinder's powers, from being able to wield 4 elements and use many dark quote-unquote elements, was derived from Malefor. These powers are more sinister in nature and in name, Poison, Shadow, Fear being the 3 that fit this profile. Now diving into another element that will be the second part of this puzzle, Aether is some all-powerful celestial magic, and Dark Aether seems to be the antithesis to that. This makes me wonder if that sort of logic reflects on the rest of the elements. Whereas the quote-unquote light elements, like fire, are common and natural among the dragons, the quote-unquote dark elements are uncommon, or the absence of what is natural to the dragons. Of course, canonically, only the chronicler seems to actually recognize what these elements are, referring to them as quote-unquote unusual abilities. Other dragons don't seem to question Cinder about having them either though, so maybe they've known about these elements beforehand, even if they are unusual. Maybe that's why they have such overarching names such as Shadow and Fear, while that might not describe them entirely. In this way, maybe the elements and their names, their abilities, are all seen through the view of the dragons. And of course, Spyro, Cinder's, and the player's view of them is also forced to attribute these elements to some vague idea of what they might actually be. The less understood an element, the more a vague term is used to describe it when it might not actually exactly cover what it is. There is a part of the Gerard Pullen headcanon, and for those who don't know who that is, they were an artist for Legend of Spyro, A New Beginning, and The Eternal Night. They mentioned their headcanon including some dark entity that created the dark elements, and that perhaps could be used to explain the differences even further. But the whole light and dark entity thing I want to save for another video, looking deeper into Gerard Pullen headcanon as a whole. Overall, the exploration of the elements from the Legend of Spyro going into the dark elements is something that's rather hard without any real lore or story to them. They just sort of exist in a vacuum, which is frustrating to say the least when you're trying to talk about them and make a video about them. That's why I combine 2 elements into one video. As far as I'm aware, they haven't really been used since their introduction, and it does bring back to mind some wishes I had that the lore of The Legend of Spyro officially had more backing during its run. Or maybe the main Spyro account can make lore posts. I don't think that would be realistic, but it would be something at least. Though that all covers what the elements do, their known story and history, their usage, and some thoughts from me. though what I say is really just speculation if it's not found in the game. Also, real quick before I go, in maybe a week's time I'll be finishing up a series of mine called The Reignited Legend. For those not in the know, it's a series where I take suggestions from my comment section and try to piece them together into a remake of The Legend of Spyro, which was also decided by comments. Now, to temper everyone's expectations, I don't really have art for this stuff. I just sort of b-roll things in the background while I talk about it. So if that seems interesting to you, feel free to stick around the channel and check it out. After that, I'll be looking into other series to cover, since the Wings of Fire video last month seemed to do alright for the channel nowadays. And in the foreseeable future going into 2025, I'll probably be alternating between Spyro videos and also videos that aren't Spyro related at all. I hope to some degree this video was enjoyable in any case. Thank you for watching if you got this far, and now I'll be rolling the Patreon credits. A big thank you to my Patreons, Episode Blue, ConquerFan91, Eric Manuel, Jabby Kiyasu Shin, Lazy, Nightmare Spyro, and Shaggy. I'll see you all the next time we talk. Stay safe, historians.